Good morning. We are in Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, page 420, 27, 28, 428, where we finished the paragraph on 428. Okay. So what we've been learning here is a very, what we can call the anatomy, dissecting this verse, HaMagbi l'sheves, K'Hashem Elokeinu, HaMagbi l'sheves, and then there's the second verse, HaMashpili liresh b'shamayim v'oretz. So the focus here is on HaMagbi l'sheves, which is the beginning of the Maimer, begins with this actual verse, which is actually the same Maimer that the Alter Rebbe begins his Maimer with in Torah that we had learned earlier, which is the basis of this Maimer and the foundational and source text of a big part of the end of Hemshech Chaim Beis. So the focus here is, after explaining HaMagbi means to lift up, halah, the Aveda Memata L'mayla Er Chayzer, that reaches all the way up into Das Elyon, into the highest levels of the divine, all the way even higher than higher and lower, to HaAtzmis, which was the intention, was that we should, create a world and be mamshich the nekuda of the yud of chachma and Torah all the way down below, and to send our soul down to this earth, so that through our aved and Torah mitzvos birurim rapach nitzutzes, by elevating the sparks back to the yud and even higher than the yud, all the way back to atzmus. So that's HaMagbi, that elevation, and that's HaMagbi with a yud at the end. But what the focus then is, why does it say l'sheves? What is l'sheves? So he basically said 2 points. One is, just like the Yerida is the Tzerech Aliyah, that the whole descent is in order to bring it back up to Magbi, so too, the Aliyah is in order to bring it back into Er Yashar, that the Hamshachah should be L'Sheves, that the divine, that highest level of divine Etzem, should come down and settle and be permanently, reside and dwell in this world, which is the mochen l'shivtecha, from the word yeshiva, like Magbi l'sheves. So that's the first point he made on page 426 and 427. And then he said, which we learned yesterday, that in order to achieve that, to achieve l'sheves, you need to have HaMagbi. In other words, it's, even though the intention is to create a yeshiva that God should rest and dwell down below, Nochin Kisach Ma'oid, he said, and Machan L'Shivtecha, etc. But how do you get there? Through the Avodah. He said the words were exactly this. We cannot have this experience of the divine essence residing in this world, in the language he used earlier, if you don't have the Allah and the Akbar of HaMagbi, that comes Sha'ela be'er chezer, b'mhuz va'atzmus, ein sof baruch hu mamish, shalamayel makol ikr makar ishtalshul mebeis deyasana. So the Magbi is in order to create l'sheves. And the l'sheves is only possible when you have Magbi, basically is what he's saying. And that's when he brought Magbi l'sheves, nochen kisech ma'oz, the expression ma'oz, and brought the medrash on oz yashir. That is Oz, that when the Yidden said Oz, they created that permanence. Like we learned in the Medrash, that till then, the Eibishter is present, the Eibishter is intact within his own reality. But is he intact? Can existence experience that etzem? And that's what happened by Shir Hayam. It created that type of isyashus, nochin kisechem Oz. And like he said, the difference, the marshal of the difference in Augustus and the Melech. That a king, even though he's a leader, but he's a leader that relates to his people, and therefore he's commensurate to them. So he stands, because standing indicates that he's still in a state of battle or preparing for battle. He's not yet settled. Augustus is a melech malchei hamlachim, refers to a higher level of king, that even the kings stand before him because they are relative to him, like servants before a king. So Augustus is a state of yeshiva, yeshiv, that he's settled, because he's settled in a state of peace and harmony and permanence and so on. So the same is with Alikus, that there's the level of Elokus, which is in a state of Amida, which means still it's subject to Tzimtzum. And he explained, even in the yeshiva, there's also an element where the king sits because he's being misamtzim after the Tzimtzum in the Kav Chut, which is a more narrow flow, a limited, diminished flow. But then there's Augustus that sits, that's a different yeshiva, that's the yeshiva of Atzmus. That Atzmus settles in Dir B'Tachtenim, that he's in a permanent way settling into this world, that he's completely integrated, as we learned. And what is integrated? Not the Elokus that relates, Malchus of Atzilus, that relates to Biyah, but it's Malchus of Ein Sof, that is capturing the Rommimus of Atzmus that's beyond existence altogether. And at the same time, that's L'Shevis, a Magbi, L'Shevis Mamish Lamata. Yeah, the Yeshua Kisem, and he said that's like the Torah when it comes down below, that Etzem is coming down to sit on the seat of judgment. And we have a taste of that in our experience through Kabbalah Sale, when we completely dedicate our lives to God, especially Rosh Hashanah, when we say the Yud Psukim of Malchus, and we are crowning God as King. Which level of the divine Malchus are we crowning? Not the divine Malchus that relates to existence, but Etzem Malchus, as it's in the Rommimus HaAtzmis, all the way in the highest of levels. And therefore, when he sits, what happens is the highest level comes down. You see, when someone sits, the head is lowered, he's not standing upright, and the legs are lifted. Here he doesn't mention it, but in Torah he says the legs lifted means that the legs are no longer immersed in the more coarse materialistic part of the world, because you've elevated the world. So the legs are lifted like a magbi in a certain way. He doesn't say that explicitly here in Torah, he does. And that's the process of what he calls Yeshiva Zu Malubish Kol Etzem HaRommimus de Pnimius VeAtzmius Li'izgili Atzmusei B'Torah Mitzvos. I'm reading the end of the paragraph on page 428. Lamata Mamish Kamei Lamayla B'Shashuyim HaMelech B'Atzmusei Mamish. So you have the highest level all the way down into the lowest. Whereas the lower level of Malchus is not the highest level, and also doesn't go down all the way into the lowest either. Because it's dafka down below in Tachtenim that we can reach that etzem, and the kavanah of the magbi is to go l'sheves, and the sheves is only possible when you have magbi and you elevate everything through your aveda and Torah mitzvahs down below, seif ma'aseh b'machshav v'tchila, the actions of Torah mitzvahs in this world. That's the summary of what we learned yesterday. End of paragraph on page 428. A brief summary.
Can you take a question?
Yeah, sure.
On 427, toward the end of the preceding paragraph, where he describes this level of what is really Augustus, for lack of a short, but he called it Bechinas Malchus de Ein Sof. And my question is, I mean, there's no spheres that are above Abiyah, at least not that I'm aware of. So is he saying
there are the spheres hagnuzis? We talked about the Esser spheres hagnuzis, lifnei atzimtzum.
Yeah.
So they're not actual spheres, but they're God already so-called envisioning and allocating resources to what will be after the tzimtzum. So you do have Malchus of Ein Sof refers to the Malchus before the tzimtzum.
Understood. And
not in
follow up.
I'm sorry?
Before the tzimtzum, but not in Atzilus.
It's
not what?
Before the it's above Atzilus.
Not in Atzilus.
We're not talking about Atzilus.
Not
we're
in
talking before the tzimtzum. Atzilus the Klolos. I mean, we're talking before the tzimtzum here. It's called Atzilus the Klolos. Atzilus, a macrocosm, is Eid Ein Sof before the tzimtzum.
And my follow-up question is, earlier in a completely different discussion, which had to do with the level at which tshuva reaches, we talked about the tachton shel babora. Is this the same level?
The tachton shel babora was talked about the context of a neshama. Yechida shebenefesh is connected to the yochid of Elokus. That's exclusively about a neshama. That's not this level, no.
Okay. Is there a level? I mean, is there this tachton shel babora? Is that above the Esser spheres hagunuzos?
It's a neshama is higher than the Esser spheres hagunuzos. Correct.
So Okay. Thank you.
But I believe the tachton shel babora he connected to the helam HaAtzmi, If you go back earlier in Ayin
Yes, I
Beis.
remember. Yeah, I remember. That was the whole Indian of
And the
reaching
Helama
rock
Atzmi,
bottom. Yeah.
Helama Atzmi, remember the essence spheres Sagnuzas are in before the Tzimtzum itself, the lowest level, because God is already envisioning existence. Either you don't have existence, but he's envisioning. Shir Atzmei B'Koyach is the expression. We say, Bereish Manusa de Malka Goliv Galifu B'Tihiri Law. You remember that language? That's before the Tzimtzum, the Tihiri Law before the Tzimtzum. But prior to that, there's the Ratzon for existence. And prior to that is Kaidem Aleisa Ratzon, where he didn't even yet arise in his desire. And you keep going to Etzem Ha'oyer, and then you have Helama Atzmi. That's where you're talking the Tachtan Shababayra and so on. We'll talk about all this when we connected back to Ayin Beis. I'm going to discuss it because remember, I've mentioned a number of times, at the end of the day, there's a convergence or confluence here between Neshama, Mitzvos, Torah, Tefillah, all in the process of creating this Dira B'Tachtenim. So each one of them serves a role. The Neshama obviously is the agent of all this because the Neshama that's actualizing it all. You know, essentially that's the messenger, the Neshama. But the Neshama, there's Torah, there's Mitzvos, and each one has their particular role. Now, as far as godliness goes, we're talking primarily two levels here, Das Elyon and Das Tachten, and then the joining of both of them. Whereas Das Tachten is more the divine as it relates to existence. Das Elyon is the divine that relates to himself, beyond existence. And then there's the joining that exactly as he is Lamaila, that's how he is Lamata, as we're learning here, which is what a Neshama ultimately achieves when it comes down below. It brings it all together. So when you're thinking from a context of Ishtalshlus and Lamaila Ishtalshlus, that's the context I would put it in.
Right. Wonderful. That was great. So, sorry, one more follow-up. If we're talking about the revelation of HaAtzmis, the ulta, the shlemus of all this, the final completion of this integration, if you will, and I understand this is la'asi lavo, but nevertheless, didn't we discuss that there would be essentially like a revelation of the Helama Atzmi, that Atzmis Mamash, the highest level, will be revealed? That's where the Inyan of Ein Od, that actually this lowest of worlds will at least be. So as I said, reveal that. Yeah.
So as I said a number of times, when you've asked this question more than once, you know that, right?
Maybe I can't. No, honestly, because I can't get it into my head. Sorry. Go ahead.
Because we haven't finished the topic, and I always answer the same thing. When you never seen the words Helama Atzmi mentioned here in this mimer. That's why I don't mention it either. Once we finish learning this mimer, and then we go back and connect it to Ayin Beis, then I will go back and start making the comparisons to Helama Atzmi and Einoid. Remember, the main focus here is Mamayla Lamata Torah Oir. Torah Oir, Ner Mitzvah and Torah Oir.
Yes,
as I emphasize again from page 1350 in Ayin Beis. Einoid that you just mentioned is prior to 1350, which really talks about tefillah going from the bottom up, and that the darkness itself reveals and expresses a divine etzem called Helama Atzmi. But this mimer that we're learning, and the mimer in Torah is referring to Ayin Beis 1350 and on. That's why I don't want to go back before 1350. Once we finish understanding the Rebbe Rashab's development of this mimer into where he would conclude Ayin Beis, then we'll go back and discuss how does that compare to the Momata Lamaila of Aramim Chalakaya Melech through Tefillah, which includes Einoid. So
awesome.
There's the V'yadaita Yayim Vashavesa Levavecha Ke'avayu Alekim B'Shemayim Mal V'Oretz Mitochas. That's really the one part. Then there's the Einoid, and then there's the Mamayla Lamata through Torah, which we're learning now. All of this will come together at some point. So it is all connected, but it would be very confusing if I went into Helama Atzmi discussion right now, because we're not talking about Helama, we're talking about Gili.
Got it, 100%. Yeah, awesome. That was really helpful. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Remember again, keep in mind the theme of sight. Always keep in mind that example, that today, for the eye to see, we need an external light, a siyua, which means we need Torah and Ner Mitzvah and Einei Ha'eda. It's because the neshama alone on its own, when it comes down below, would not know what to do if you didn't have Torah mitzvahs. Even with Torah mitzvahs, look how difficult it is. That's today. La'asid Lave, Then we'll reach etzem koyach hariyah, where the eye will be able to see without external light. Einenu me'iris ki shemesh kireach. If you keep that in mind, you'll see that these two aspects will keep coming up again and again. I'll talk about this a lot more later in a much more organized way when we go back to Ayin Beis. Right now would be a little too overwhelming because he's still in the middle of the discussion of Hamagbi and Hamashpili, or Dasali and Das Tachten, the two Yechudim, transforming the animal soul into Vahafta.
Got it.
So
100%. Yeah.
So
100%. Yeah. Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you. Very helpful.
Yeah.
It's just helpful to be able to place this in the biggest, largest scheme that we've talked about in Ayin Beis. That's all,
and we'll try to figure out also at the time, once you get to the place where Atzmus unites Yichud Eloi, Yichud Tata, is that the Helam HaAtzmi? Is it higher than the Helam HaAtzmi? Is it lower than the Helam HaAtzmi? That's all going to be relevant because Helam is not Gilui. And the truth is, Atzmus is neither Helam or Gilui. He's also beyond both. So that also needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
There's plenty to talk about. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very, very much.
Okay. So any other questions? If not, we'll continue reading here. So the new paragraph on page 4.
Also, the point of Helam HaAtzmi, is this part of the HaAtzmis, or this is already a lower level?
Obviously, anything with a name is already a lower level. Atzmus doesn't have names. He's not limited by Helam. He's not limited by Gilui. It's all levels at the end of the day. Helam HaAtzmi, however, is a very high level because it's beyond any form of expression. But to say Helam HaAtzmi, that's Atzmus. Atzmus is not defined by Helam HaAtzmi either, ultimately. But we'll talk about this. We'll talk about it. You have to go back to Ayin Beis and look inside when he speaks about how Neshama is rooted all the way, where he talks about the Sheirish HaKelim is higher than Sheirish HaEr. Remember, that's the key to Helam HaAtzmi. The Shimu is higher than the Kav.
100%.
Yeah. So now continuing on, page 428. The new paragraph. V'zehu. So now he brings it back to the beginning of the pasuk. Remember, now explain on Magbi l'sheves. Very clear. The truth is, one second, maybe I'll go to the Torah now. I'm not sure what I should do. Now let's continue learning here. Maybe I'll go back to the Torah of the Alter Rebbe afterwards. So he says like this: V'zehu mi K'Hashem Elokeinu dafke hamagbi l'sheves. Remember the beginning. It doesn't just say hamagbi l'sheves. It says mi K'Hashem Elokeinu. Who is like Hashem Elokeinu, God, our God? And like he said earlier, that this is miyuchad. The words he used was it's miyuchad l'neshamas Yisrael. When you say Mika Hashem Elokeinu, means someone is speaking with a certain exclusivity. Who is like our God? Like he said on page 424. So we're talking about the neshamas as they are drawing down this level. So he says Mika Hashem Elokeinu. Remember, he compared that to Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu, to experience that total utter unity of the two levels of unity. The third level, which joins Das Ari and Das Tach, and joins Yichud Eloi Yichud Tata. So he says, now this is Mika Dafke Hamagbi l'Sheves. Sha'idei shenikra Hashem Elokeinu b'Torah Mitzvos lamata. What he means here, shenikra, not that he just called. It means that we are calling him. We are like being mamshich Hashem Elokeinu through the Torah Mitzvos lamata. That what? That neshamas Yisrael mekablim shemekablim el malchus shamayim l'kiyum ritzeni HaAtzmis b'mitzvos b'peil mamish. B'dvar melech ha'primius, meaning that we are accepting the order, the command. Like say, dvar melech shilton, the God's command to us in Torah, like we said before. How we mamshich the sheves, of Atzmus down below is through HaMagbi, through us, through our Torah mitzvahs, through our Kabbalah sale, through Rosh Hashanah. When we say Amru Lefonei Malchius Kadesha Tamlichuni Aleichem. So what are we doing? We're drawing down the Malchus of the highest levels through our Kabbalah sale by being Mekayim Rotzen HaAtzmi, the very core Rotzen of Hashem in Mitzvos. The Pel Mamish in this world, the Dvar Melech HaPnimius, the inner Dvar Melech. In other words, not just the words of God as He creates existence, but His inner Kavana, which is the Mitzvos, like the Indian Shav Tamlichuni, that you're Tamlichuni Aleichem. It's not just Tamlichuni, like he said before, Melech Yisrael, not just Melech Al Agoyim. We're not just talking about God as King of the universe, which means He relates to the existence. We're talking about Tamlichuni Aleichem. So there's something unique here that we are drawing forth, K'Hashem Elokeinu, Al Yedei Zeh, dafke through that, Ma'ir L'mayla Mayla Bereishis HaAtzmis the Ein Sof Mamish. So when we say K'Hashem Elokeinu, which means we're drawing and we're saying, look at who is this God of ours, our special God, and which means our Aveda of HaMagbi, of elevating ourselves through Kabbalah sale, not to serve our own needs, but to elevate all of existence to this God, to this highest level. So through that, you're talking about higher and higher. In Rommimus HaAtzmis the Ein Sof, not the Rommimus of Elokus as it relates to exist, not just a Melech as it relates to his subjects, but Rommimus HaAtzmis the Ein Sof Mashanikra Melech Meromim Levade. Like he said before, Melech Yochid, Melech HaKodesh. He's completely exalted on his own, not as he relates to us. On his own, he's just an exclusive other reality. I like to use the word higher or other reality altogether. Because as we said, you could always say, the fact is, because we're creatures of God and creations, we can only relate to God as He relates to us. So no, that would be the God that is so-called subject to tzimtzumim and concealment and lavush and so on. The goal here is that we're having a relationship with God as He is on His own, completely in His own inner sanctum, where He's beyond everything. As He sits on a kisei, on a throne that is Rom V'Nisa, that is exalted and beyond, in Atzmusei Mamish. We're not talking about yeshiva, like he said earlier, where the king is mitzamtzim himself, and he comes down to the level of his subjects. We're talking about that level of Atzmus is coming into a state of complete integration, like when we say Dira B'Tachtenim, B'Shachanti B'Seicham. He's sheikhin there. He actually dwells and resides in the Mishkan, or in the broader sense, in Dira B'Tachtenim, but it's the level of Atzmus that we're talking here. So who generates that? That's the K'Hashem Elokeinu of the Neshamas Yisrael through our Aveda of Kabbalah Seil. So that's why HaMagbi L'Sheves is the second half of the verse. The first half is what our Aveda is, like Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu. We declare K'Hashem Elokeinu, and through that we elevate the Magbia, we elevate it all to the highest level of Rommimus HaAtzmis. L'Sheves should then be integrated in the full sense of the word, that way is Lamaila, that's how he should be Lamata, without any change, because he's beyond both. That's what he's now introducing, coming back to explaining the verse, K'Hashem Elokeinu. V'hu mashu kosav. And this is what it says, HaMagbi L'Sheves. The yeshiva zeis, that's the emphasis on L'Sheves. The yeshiva zeis, this, I don't like the word sitting, but this settling in. We have another word, like integration is for me the best word so far. But this yeshiva, like we said, Augustus, he's sitting on his throne in a settled, in a peaceful, in an integrated way. Who, B'kisei Elyon, that's in the supernal throne. In other words, there's a Kisei Atachten, there's a Kisei Elyon. The Kisei Atachten is like Malchus of Atzilus, as he sits on the throne of Kursaya of Bria. Bria is called Elam HaKisei. That's subject to Tzimtzum. But Kisei Elyon, Sha'ama Nochen Kisecha Ma'oz. Remember, Ma'oz is referring to Ma'oz from the highest level forever, from before it all began. Taram Yitzur Nivra, like he said before. Hashem Melech b'Taram Yikol Yitzur Nivra. So it's ma'oz, like we learned on the previous page, Dafka. So that's the focus on the yeshiva, that it comes down, nochin kisech ma'oz. Yeah. So it's a combination of the highest and being manifest all the way within adira betachtenim. Adira means bisyashvus, settled in. It's like your home. It's not a guest house. It's not it's not just a temporary tourist passing through. This is your home. So your God says, I want a home in this world. A home is a very different, it's a permanent residence. Maybe that's a good word here. Residence maybe is the good word here. It's a permanent residence of Atzmus in this world. Yeah.
Dwelling. It's your dwelling.
Yeah. 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 I mean, we can use, as we say many times, you can use many different English words. They all capture the. Okay. Any questions before we go to the parentheses now? Okay. I have to say, like I've said a number of times, the Mittler Rebbe's language, to be honest, it's always been difficult for me. I guess not just for me, anyone who really learns it. When you get used to the Rebbe Rashab, you get spoiled a bit. I'm not comparing. Every Rebbe is a Atzmi and he's writing exactly as it's supposed to be writing. But we call it from Das Tachten, for many of us, the Rebbe Rashab is very, very smooth writing. It's not deep, it's very deep concepts, it's hard material, difficult material, but his writing is very clear. The Mittler Rebbe is, I find, you have to put an extra effort because there's a lot, like you could feel there's more that he wants to say than he's actually writing. It's almost like, as I said, it's like almost overflowing. Like I mentioned that Mittler Rebbe wrote Chassidus, he wrote so quickly that by the time he got to the bottom of the page, he was writing with a quill and ink. It was still wet, the top of the page. That's how quickly he wrote. To the point that someone have to move his page because he would write on the bottom line, would go over onto the desk. So they would move the page. I saw this with my own eyes in the Rebbe's library. You see the bottom lines are like halfway. That means he wrote half of the line remained on the desk. You can still read it. But that's how quick his flow, his oiris were like almost overwhelming the kalim. And you could feel it. I don't know if you sense it when we read it. I mean, I try to explain. I'm trying to put a lot of words and extra words to explain it. But the actual language when you read it is harder than the Rebbe Rashab's. The words and the oir seem to be, at least again from my limited perspective, are more commensurate and more like it's easier to understand. I don't know if anybody else feels this, what I'm saying right now, but I definitely do.
I think
Again,
it's because
I'm compensating by explaining it more, but I just have to say, because every time I read, I see, he says something and then he doesn't almost doesn't say the whole sentence. He's relying that you.
Do you think maybe he's trying to be a little cryptic? Some Mikubalim were like a little cryptic.
No, I don't. I think it's the opposite.
That's the way his mind works.
Right. I think the opposite. It's like somebody who's like a genius who's talking so quickly and he's trying his best to get it over to you, but his flow is so intense. It's like almost over.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's kind of like when the Rebbe was davening. When the Rebbe was davening, he had the same problem.
Which Rebbe?
The latest Rebbe, the seventh Rebbe Menachem.
What problem? I never heard.
He said when he would daven like so fast, he would sometimes get lost in his davening or something like that. Something along that line.
I don't know. I never heard that actually, but I hear what you're saying. I don't know if it's comparable here. I think it's more like when somebody's excited and they're pouring you, let's say, water or wine, and they're just pouring so much that it keeps spilling over. It spills over. That's my sense of it. Anyway.
Also, when he was talking, he has to say "sha sha." Silent. But his mind was overflowing. To tell his mind. Yeah.
There's
the
a story
irony is that he's so expansive. I mean, even I agree with what you said, but at the same time, his expansion of his thinking is broader than I think any other Rebbe. I mean, his Maimarim are very long, and he tends to go on with ideas, and go on and go on. It's like a stream of consciousness. So even though he may be, he's not giving every word, he's not completing every thought per se before he moves on to the next. He's everything barichos. Everything is it's very extensive. So it's a little ironic. What would happen if he did put every word down? It would for sure be the longest, most verbose, if you will, Rebbe. No.
He is already.
It's a Machshava said about it that when you was cutting his finger, the other person is blood, but it was Chassidus.
Right, it would be chassidus, not blood, exactly. Anyway, it's Rechevus Hanor. The expression is Rechevus Hanor of Bina is the expansiveness. Chachma is like a mayon, is a spring of water. It's drop by drop, like a wellspring. A river is overflowing and expansive. Rechevus Hanor. It's called expanses of the river. It takes those intense drops and expands them. So, just pointing out, because I was reading now and I see here. Anyway, my own feeling as I read this, and okay. So let's see here. Maybe we'll stop here. Maybe not. I'm just thinking, I want to see how far this, okay, the parentheses goes inside of a bracket. Okay. I'll read a few more lines. Let me see till I'll try to reach till beginning of next page. Let's see. Okay. It says, Ukamay Rosh Hashanah, like, excuse me?
I was just going to say I had a quick question. Do you think that the Mittler Rebbe would review his Maamarim, or there was somebody who actually reviewed it for him? Like,
You mean after he wrote it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How would I know? I don't know if you know.
I didn't know if we knew. Okay, thank you.
I mean, there are Sforim that he wrote that he published. There, I would assume he probably looked it over before it was printed. These Maamarim, I don't know. I think, as I said, I pointed out, I don't know if this is, this was not published in the time of the Mittler Rebbe. So most likely he wrote this, then was rewritten by others, and it was not published. But like Teres Chaim or Bir Azayar or the Siddur, there's a bunch of Sforim from the Mittler Rebbe that he actually published a book. There, I would assume that before it went to print, he must have reviewed it again. But maybe not. I would have to look up to see those that prepared it for publication, if they have any comments on that. Okay. So he says, okay, so we're Mamshich HaAtzmis down below. So he says like this, Ukamay Rosh Hashanah. Remember before he referred to Rosh Hashanah when we crown God as king. But we're not crowning God as king, the lower level of Malchus, it's the higher level, all the way from the core essence. Everything reverts back to its original source, Rosh Hashanah. So we said we do it through the Al Yedei Yud Psukim, the Malchus, B'Tanach. So when we say the 10 Psukim, we say in Musaf, we say the 10 verses from Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim that all indicate on crowning God. So when we say the Psukim, we're actually invoking and crowning God as king. So he says, so we say, right? We say, this is the day, the beginning of your creations, your actions, your creation. So it reminds us of the first day. What does that mean? The Ma'aseh Bereishis. So the creation of Rosh Hashanah, we're invoking the Ma'aseh Bereishis. When God created existence, the creation of existence came through a tzimtzum. The tzimtzum that the Melech descends b'yerida, the tzimtzum and concealment. Rommimus HaAtzmis, k'meshekos Hashem molach, lovash Hashem eiz ve'ein eiz elatera. So this is how from the Rommimus HaAtzmis comes down into Malchus. Shem molach, he puts on a garment, the garment of eiz. What's eiz? Eiz is Torah. So God is putting on the garment of Torah. She'amar bi melochim yimleichu. Kings reign because from within me. From me come the reign kings. So in other words, it's the source of all melochim. B'kach b'chol yom b'krishma. So that's on Rosh Hashanah. On a more microcosmic level, every day in Krishma, when we say Shema, we're also being mamshich. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Shemamshichim melech yachid levadei. We're drawing from melech yachid levadei, Malchus, the Eibishter as he is, exclusively, beyond everything. And where are we drawing it into Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, like Hashem Elokeinu, lies alufe shalelam, aleph the Echad. So when we say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, we're drawing from the highest levels of Elokus into Echad. Echad is already alufa shalelam, as it's being nimshach into the ches and dalet of existence. So Echad is not Yochid Che'elamim, where the Eibishter is completely Yochid Levade, completely exclusively separate. It's how Elokus is unites with existence. Aleph Ches Dalet of Echad is Aleph is alufa shalelam, the master of the world, called alufa shalelam. He's relating to existence. Ches are the 7 heavens and earth, and Dalet are the 4 different directions: north, south, east, west. So you see, Shezeo Mashehirich beDalet. You may remember in Ayin Beis Hamayirich beEchad. Remember that's the Hirich beDalet. That when we say Echad, where we lengthen our saying of the Dalet, both physically we say Echad, but there's also we learn Hamayirich beEchad that we contemplate in the arichas of the whole ishtalshlus, how from the highest levels comes down to the lowest levels. If you recall, when he spoke, Belal the echad shetamlichu b'shamayim v'aretz, med kant amlichte b'shamayim v'aretz. We are crowning God and we're declaring God as a sovereign God over heaven and earth. B'bchinas mokim, that relates to mokim. Like I said, 7 heavens and earth and the 4 directions. The vov ktsovis el yenim. The 6 different directions, which is north, south, east, west, top and bottom. So we're drawing down from the highest levels of Malchus of Atzmus into, from the Mekayme HaAtzmi, his own core place where he's beyond it all, we're drawing it down into a flow, into a diminished or concealed flow. She'ena Ela Mekayme canal. Now, this is a bracket because it's another manuscript. But here you see the parentheses ends. The parentheses he began at Kamei Rosh Hashanah seems to end here. So anyway, so bottom line is, Mekeme Atzmi, the place where Eina Ela Mekeme, where he contains existence, but existence doesn't contain him. Remember the higher level of where he's loy nitfas. He's not nitfas in it. Loy tofis b'kulam, he's Eina Ela Mekeme. The level that we talked about where he's completely beyond. And we're drawing that down into existence. The Zewa Magbi L'Sheves, and that's Magbi L'Sheves. Bahalav Agba, by the elevation and the lifting up, the Rommimus HaAtzmus, in the exalted or the higher state of Atzmus, Li'esiyeshev Behelam Vehester, he should sit and he should dwell, Behelam Vehester, in the concealment and in the covering below, Sheba Atzmus Shenikra Kos Yutke. Actually, I should correct myself. Helam Vehester Sheba Atzmus sounds actually like Helam Atzmi, to be honest. He doesn't say the word Atzmi, but he says, Yesha Behelam Vehester Sheba Atzmus, not Helam Vehester Sheba Shelamata. Like he said before, he said that expression earlier also. I wanted to elaborate on it, but he said the words, what he said, but Amazon was expression. Where did he use the expression?
Which expression? Ha'olam hakama? She'ein ha'olam hakama?
No. He used an expression, a helam within Atzmos. Okay, I see. In the previous paragraph, he says, Yeshivas v'malubish kol etzem ha'remes the primis asalis gilead atzmusei. A little earlier, he said these words. One second. Anyway, this is going to need to be elaborated upon, which I can't do right now. But let's just stop here. He says, now he's saying, Yeshiv behelim behester HaAtzmis, like when we say, if you remember, Yoshas cheshech sisrei, even though he doesn't bring that, shenikra kos yutke or kisei be'echad k'moy be'kisei drashana k'moy shashamam. Okay, I'm going to stop here because it's a little confusing without explaining it. But bottom line is, we're bringing from the highest level down below. The question is what he means here when he says behelim vehester. That's why I'll stop here and I'll explain that in the next class. I'll stop right here. I think this is a good place to stop. Top of page 429. Are there any questions? I'm going to stop
What does
here.
it mean, what he's saying there before? K'moy b'rosh Hashanah, k'moy yud pe'omim v'malchus v'tanach.
Yud psukim, Yud
What is
psukim.
this?
Yud psukim, the 10 psukim of Malchus that we say in Musaf, in Rosh Hashanah. I mean, you mean to say Yud, we say 9 psukim, right? 9 psukim. I said Yud pay. 1 second. I think Yud pay is Yud psukim. Why is it 10 psukim? Even though you say 999 for Malchus Zechrei Shefres, good question actually. But I don't think it's Yud Pa'amim. Because we don't say it 10 times. We say it 3 times. Well, 1 second, maybe we do 3 times. Then again in Musaf of Chazar Sashatz, another 3 times. Maybe we do. I have to look it up. He said in the Gemara Rosh Hashanah Daf Zayin. Not sure. I think it's Yud Psukim, not Yud Pomim. I'll look it up. I'll answer that. It's a good question. I have to look up what the Yud Pei is. I'm sure it's Yud Psukim. The Gemara may say it very straightforward. Okay. So we'll stop here. I'll get back about this tomorrow, about the Yud Psukim. I want to look it up. Page 429, 4 or 5 lines from the top. Any other questions? Just stop here.